Let's start with a simple but fundamental question. What determines the total climate impact of transport? This equation explains. It shows that the total climate effect can be written as the product of four terms adjusted for carbon and non-carbon impacts. The first factor is unit fuel consumption. How much fuel is required per passenger or per ton of cargo? If aircraft become more efficient, if ships improve their engines, or if fleets are modernized, this number falls. That reduces emissions regardless of the fuel type. The second factor is the share of fossil fuel equivalent. Even if total fuel use remains constant, emissions fall when fossil fuels are replaced by greener alternatives. This could be sustainable aviation fuel, synthetic fuels, hydrogen, or other types of green fuels. The third factor is transport volume. If demand increases significantly, total emissions can increase even if fuel efficiency improves. So volume matters too. Finally, the equation includes both carbon and non-carbon effects. Aviation produces contrails. Shipping produces black carbon. These effects can be substantial and sometimes comparable to carbon itself. This means that climate policy should not only focus on carbon alone. Now, here is the key insight. This equation shows that there are multiple pathways to reduce the climate impact of transport. Improve efficiency, change fuels, reduce demand, reduce non-carbon effects. And because there are many pathways, we cannot know in advance which one will turn out to be the most cost-effective. Technological development is uncertain. The future, innovation, is unpredictable. This is why technology-neutral climate policies are so important. A technology-neutral policy does not dictate which fuel must be used, which engine must dominate, or which pathway must succeed. Instead, it sets an environmental objective, for example, a cap on emissions, and lets firms discover the most efficient way for reducing emissions. If policies are too restrictive, for example, by mandating specific fuels or technologies, they risk locking the system into expensive pathways. And that can come at a high cost. We may end up reducing emissions in ways that are far more expensive than necessary. So when we compare climate policies, the central questions become, do these policies preserve flexibility? Do they allow different pathways to compete? Or do they narrow the solution space too early? In other words, are they technology neutral?
The greatest, kind of boost to the theory of market-based mechanisms that happened in the history of policy was the sulfur dioxide trading markets in the United States back in the 80s and early 90s. This was to deal with acid rain problems, mainly from coal-fired power plants in the United States that emitted sulfur dioxide, were creating regional damages, really substantial. Regulators thought, well, the main way that they should solve this problem is by installing these really expensive, like $1 billion scrubbers that just kind of like filter the air and try to take some of the particulates out from the smokestack. And that was what everybody thought would happen. But instead of mandating scrubbers, what they did initially was they created a trading program. And lo and behold, it turned out that the most cost-effective solution for most coal-fired power plants was to actually ship low-sulfur coal from across the country to their facility and burn the low-sulfur coal, and they could avoid installing the scrubbers. And so the policy succeeded at a much lower cost than anybody had anticipated. And what's interesting is part of the reason that worked and people hadn't expected it is that it coincided with changes in the railroad regulation industry that brought prices down. And so shipping the coal across the country turned out to be much cheaper than people had expected. And that just goes to show that's the kind of thing that even a really smart policymaker might not anticipate and see this chain of events. See, we economists love putting out there an agnostic policy that says, I'm going to set you a goal. You figure out how to meet it. As long as I believe the metric I'm setting out, as long as the metric is right, you come up with whatever solution you come up with. And so I think that is a good feature of the IMO's approach.
I would say I was more a critic than an architect of California low carbon fuel standard. A bit of background on what that actually was. The California low carbon fuel standard came about in the early 2000s, and it was a way of incentivizing low carbon fuels. And at that point, we didn't know what the answer was going to be for transportation fuels. So it was a very kind of open policy. It had a lot of different pathways. And what it did was it combined carrots and sticks in an interesting way, in that if the fuel you were producing was above a certain threshold, then you got kind of the stick. You had to pay. You had to purchase LCFS credits. And then those LCF credits went to producers who were producing fuels that were cleaner than that standard. So there was the specific target. There was not a volumetric target. It was rather a target on the percentage. The money was not flowing through the government. It was not coming from the Treasury. The money for the subsidies was coming from the dirtier producers. And so that acted kind of as a disincentive for them, as well as an incentive for the cleaner producers. It wasn't explicitly a tax because it didn't flow to the Treasury. It was passed, you had to purchase credits, and you purchased credits from those who were selling them, and those were people who had exceeded the standard. And so it was effectively, it was built as a market mechanism. In reality, it's kind of turned out to be not a bad mechanism, in that, among other things, it allowed a lot of flexibility for different pathways, for biofuels, for hydrogen, for the potential for hydrogen to vehicles, and also for electric. By not being technology specific, by just saying, if you beat this standard, then you qualify for the subsidy. If you are worse than the standard, then you have to pay this implicit tax. That allowed for the flexibility of all kinds of different technologies, and particularly, electric, hydrogen, and biofuels. And then we just kind of let the market decide which of those was best. And it looks, as you said, it looks like EVs, it looks like batteries have won the day, and it's not over yet, but I think, at this point they are moving rapidly forward. And that's one of the lessons potentially for sustainable aviation fuels too. There are still all these pathways available for aviation as well. There are people trying to develop electric planes, right? Yeah. Hydrogen is a potential answer as well. Yeah. In California, back when we were developing this, we thought advanced biofuels were going to be the answer. And right now, it looks like that's the answer for aviation as well. But I think wise policy will allow scope for other pathways.